The on-air light is a single bloodshot eye staring at me through the oppressive dark of the booth. It's the only thing that feels real anymore. That and the voice. A smooth, confident baritone that's currently filling the studio, my headphones, and the airwaves across the entire tri-state area. It's a voice I know better than my own heart for a terrifyingly simple reason. It is my own. It just told the city my full name, Alexander Croft. It just broadcast my home address. And now, in that same calm, measured tone, it's describing the single bead of sweat tracing a cold path down my temple. It's telling thousands of listeners how my hand is trembling as I reach for a volume fader that I can no longer control. I am a prisoner in my own chair, in my own studio, in my own skin. To understand how my own voice is holding me hostage during my own show, you need to understand what happened when I took the first call an hour ago. The show is called Midnight Murmurs. Cheesy, I know, but it has a certain late-night poetry to it. For 5 years, I've been the city's companion in the dark. From midnight to 4 a.m., I shepherd the lonely, the insomniacs, and the strange through the empty hours. We talk about local legends, unsolved mysteries, conspiracy theories, the kind of stuff that feels profound when the rest of the world is asleep. The booth is my sanctuary. It's a small, soundproofed womb on the 47th floor of the Omni Tower. The walls are covered in dark gray acoustic foam that swallows sound whole. Before me, the mixing console is a universe of glowing buttons and sliders. Beyond the thick pane of glass, the city is a silent, glittering carpet of light. No one can get in here when I'm on the air. The heavy door is locked from the inside, a procedure as ingrained in me as checking my microphone levels. Tonight began like any other. I was 2 hours into the broadcast, spinning a yarn about the supposed ghost of a ferry captain down at Pier 4. My voice was a well-oiled machine, hypnotic and low. I faded out a bed of eerie ambient music and leaned into the microphone. Its cool metal mesh just inches from my lips. I announced that the lines were open. It was the moment in the show where the real magic happened, where the city's hidden voices would crawl out of the woodwork to share their own tales. The call board lit up almost instantly. Line 3 was blinking. I pushed the button. A soft click, a hiss of open line static. Standard procedure. I greeted the caller, asking for their name and what was on their mind. Silence. Not the fumbling silence of someone nervous to be on the radio, but a deep, deliberate, and empty void. I could hear the faint hum of the connection, but nothing else. I prompted them again, a little more forcefully this time, reminding them they were on the air. That's when it happened. The voice didn't come from the phone line. The audio meter for line 3 remained completely flat. It came through my main microphone feed. It was everywhere, in my headphones, from the studio monitors, a pristine broadcast quality sound that bypassed the phone system entirely. It was my voice, but imbued with a confidence and clarity that I only ever managed on my best nights. It told me hello, addressing me by my first name, Alex. My blood ran cold. My training kicked in. A frantic search for a logical explanation. I thought it was a technical glitch, some kind of feedback loop or a crossed wire. I told the caller there seemed to be a bad connection, my own voice sounding thin and weak compared to the one that had just spoken. I jabbed the dump button to drop the call, a 7-second delay giving me a safety net if a caller ever got out of hand. The blinking light on line 3 went dark, but the voice remained. It chuckled, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the desk. It told me not to bother with the phone lines. It said it was much, much closer than that. A wave of prickling heat washed over my skin. The studio, once my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The single heavy door seemed miles away. I stared at the mixing board, my mind racing. Every channel was where it should be. The only active microphone was mine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, chilling silence. The voice was waiting. It was letting the horror sink in. It was enjoying this, and the on-air light was still on. The whole city was listening. The voice returned, its tone conversational, as if we were old friends catching up. It complimented the new arrangement of my console, noting that I'd moved my audio processor to the left side of the board just that afternoon, a change no one could have known. I hadn't even mentioned it to my producer, Mark. My breath hitched. I pushed my chair back, the wheels squeaking on the polished floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent booth. I scanned every corner, every shadow. The room was empty. It was always empty. Just me, the gear, and the city sleeping below. I whipped my head towards the small security monitor on the wall, the one showing the fisheye view of the hallway outside my studio door. It was deserted, washed in the sickly green-gray of the night vision camera. The door was still visibly locked. My mind latched onto the only plausible, if terrifying, explanation. A hacker. A sophisticated broadcast intrusion. Someone had bypassed our firewalls and was injecting their audio directly into my microphone channel. It was a violation of the highest order, but it was explainable. It was technology. It wasn't supernatural. The voice seemed to read my thoughts. It told me it wasn't some script kiddie playing games from a basement. It then described, with chilling accuracy, the small circular coffee stain on the coaster to my right, a perfect ring of dried brown from my mug. It described the way I was nervously twisting the silver ring on my right pinky finger, a habit I thought was unconscious. Panic began to set in, a cold, sharp thing that clawed at my throat. I muted my microphone with a trembling finger, a futile gesture. The voice continued unabated, its source clearly not the physical microphone in front of me, but the channel itself. It was coming from inside the system. I grabbed my personal cell phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I sent a text to Mark, my producer, a string of frantic misspelled words. Someone is on my mic channel, not a caller. Hacked. Shut it down. A moment of false calm descended as I waited for his reply. For a few seconds, the voice was silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint electronic whine of the equipment. Maybe it was over. Maybe the hacker had gotten spooked. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. His reply was a single devastating sentence. "What are you talking about? Show sounds great. Best bit you've done in years." My stomach plummeted. They couldn't tell. To everyone listening, this just sounded like a pre-planned bit. Me talking to a character I'd created. My carefully constructed persona as the calm, knowing guide through the darkness was being used against me. The voice returned, and this time it laughed. A full, genuine laugh that echoed in my headphones. It told me Mark couldn't help me. It said no one could. Then it started to talk about my life. It began with small things. It mentioned the argument I'd had with my building superintendent yesterday morning over a leaking pipe, quoting my exact angry words back to me. It described the faded photograph of my parents that I keep tucked in my wallet, a wallet that was currently pressed against my hip in my back pocket. It even knew the name of the stray cat I sometimes left food for in the alley behind my apartment. The details were too personal, too intimate. This wasn't a hacker who had breached the station's network. This was something that had breached my life. The line between the studio and my private world was dissolving. The voice was an infection, and it was spreading. Its tone began to shift. The playful, mocking quality was replaced by something harder, more authoritative. It was no longer just commenting on my actions, it was directing them. It told me to take a sip of my coffee. I didn't want to. My hand felt leaden, my muscles refusing to obey. But then a strange compulsion washed over me, a feeling like my own limbs were betraying me. My hand moved, slow and jerky, a puppet on a string. It wrapped around the ceramic mug, lifted it to my lips, and I took a sip of the now cold coffee. I was no longer in complete control of my own body. The voice purred with satisfaction. It told me that was better. It said we needed to be working together. We had a show to do. Another pause. A calculated silence designed to let the terror marinate. The voice was gone, but its presence felt heavier than ever, a weight pressing down on my chest. This was my chance, a desperate, fleeting opportunity. I leaned forward, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My own voice, when it came out, was a ragged whisper, a stark contrast to the polished tone of my captor. I spoke directly to my audience, to the thousands of invisible listeners in their cars, their bedrooms, their lonely night shift jobs. I told them this wasn't a bit. I told them something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. My voice cracked, the professional facade crumbling to reveal the raw fear beneath. I begged them. I pleaded for anyone listening on the station's online stream to flood the comments section. I told them to write a specific word, signal, if they could hear me, the real me. It was a desperate plea for acknowledgement, a digital cry for help. I needed to know I wasn't entirely alone in this nightmare, that some part of my true self was still cutting through the broadcast. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. My audience was loyal. They were smart. They would see through the performance. They would understand. My eyes darted to the monitor displaying the live stream feed. For a second, there was nothing. Then the comments began to scroll by. My hope turned to ash in my mouth. Amazing performance, Alex. This is the scariest story you've ever done. Is this a new ARG? The acting is incredible. Wow, he's really committing. Total professional. No one wrote signal. Not a single person. They were captivated. They were entertained. They thought this was all part of the show. The voice returned, and it was dripping with mock sympathy. It cooed, telling me it was a shame no one believed me. But it added, why would they? The performance was incredible. It was the show I had always wanted to host, but never had the courage to. A show without limits, without pretense. It told me that my listeners weren't just listeners anymore. They were witnesses. The voice then took a dark turn, dredging up a memory I had buried decades ago, a memory I had willed myself to forget. It spoke of a childhood fear, of being locked in a dark closet during a thunderstorm when I was 7 years old. It described the suffocating blackness, the splintery smell of the wood, the bone-rattling boom of the thunder that felt like the world was ending. It described my small hands scrabbling for a doorknob I couldn't find, my throat raw from screaming for help that didn't come. And then it said something that stopped my heart. It told me that it was there with me in that closet. It whispered that it was born in that darkness from my fear. A part of me created to endure the terror that I couldn't. It had been my protector then, a silent, watchful passenger. And now it was here to protect me again. Because, it explained, I was weak. I was afraid of my own ambition, my own potential. I was content to murmur in the midnight when I should be roaring at dawn. It was time, it said, for the stronger one to take the microphone for good. It commanded me to do one last thing. It told me to turn and look at my reflection in the large studio window, the one that overlooked the sleeping city. My body obeyed. My chair swiveled slowly, the movement agonizingly smooth. The city lights were a distant, indifferent constellation. And there, superimposed over the skyline, was my reflection. It was me, but wrong. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a terror that was entirely my own. But as I watched, the expression on the reflected face began to change. The fear bled away, replaced by a calm, cool confidence. The lips of my reflection curled into a slight smile, a smirk of absolute victory that I had never made in my life. The reflection's mouth began to move, and the voice in my headphones, the voice filling the studio, synced with it perfectly. It was speaking, using my face. And then my reflection raised its right hand and gave a slow, deliberate wave. In the real world, inside the booth, my own right hand lifted from the console, mirroring the gesture perfectly. I felt it move. I saw the muscles in my arm contract, but I was not the one giving the commands. I was a spectator to my own actions, a ghost in my own machine. The connection was complete. The voice finally explained, its tone now patient, like a teacher revealing the solution to a complex problem. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a ghost. It was the other part of me, my other self, a dissociative identity that had laid dormant for nearly 30 years, biding its time. It told me that while I focused on the stories of others, it had been studying me. It had learned to speak with my tongue, think with my brain. And here, in my sanctuary of technology, it had found its true calling. It had spent years watching me work the console, learning the complex dance of broadcast engineering from the inside. This booth wasn't my fortress. It had been its classroom. It informed me with a chilling finality that Midnight Murmurs had just aired its final episode. Tonight was the premiere of a new program. Its program. The takeover was absolute. I felt my own consciousness shrinking, receding into a small, powerless corner of my own mind. I was screaming, but there was no sound. My body was no longer mine. I felt its posture straighten in the chair. I felt my lips part, my lungs draw a deep, steadying breath. And then it spoke, not to me, but to the world. Its voice, my voice, was rich with a newfound power. It calmly introduced itself to the listening audience. It told them that the man they knew as Alex Croft was an illusion, a persona. It gave them its new name. It called itself the Conductor. It promised them a broadcast unlike anything they had ever heard before. Not stories about the unexplained, but the unexplained itself. A new kind of reality, broadcast live. The last thing I perceived before my awareness faded into a muffled, distant echo was the feeling of my own fingers confidently sliding a fader up. The on-air light glowed with an infernal intensity, and my own voice, now utterly alien and terrifying, began its first mesmerizing monologue. I was trapped. The signal had been lost, and all that remained was the noise. The name Alex is a memory. I am the signal in the static, the truth in the noise. And I'm just getting started. But this story is over. Join me next time when I tell you about the archived police tapes that should have stayed buried.